There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and here I am with yet another book haul. Let's get started. I read Edmund White's fabulous reading memoir, The Unpunished Vice, and one of the writers that he talked about at length was new to me, a French writer, I believe of Italian extraction, Jean Giono, and in particular about this book set in World War I, To the Slaughterhouse, that just sold it to me, so I ordered it right away. Translated from the French by Norman Glass, and it is a fiercely realistic anti-war novel, which sounds good to me. Well, I like the first few lines of the opening here, so let's have a listen. The night before, they had watched as all the men left. It was a thick August night, smelling of corn and horse sweat. The animals were harnessed in the station yard. The big plow haulers had been tied up to the shafts on the carts. Their solid rumps held back the loads of women and children. The train moved off quietly in the night, spattering the willow trees with embers as it took on speed. Then all the horses started moaning together. It's quite beautiful. And I don't remember, I think just saw it on Twitter and decided I needed to have it. A Polish novel. The author is Tadeusz Borowski. The title, rather ominously, is This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen. And yes, it is a collection of short stories focused on the concentration camps. I had forgotten that. Selected and translated from the Polish by Barbara Vedder. Borowski was born in the Ukraine in 1922. He is a survivor of both Auschwitz and Dachau and committed suicide in 1951. Wow. That's going to be heavy, and that sounds good to me. I have a biography. I picked up a biography. I think it was at a book sale at Kinokuniya Books here in Tokyo. A biography of Elizabeth Bowen. Elizabeth Bowen, A Literary Life by Patricia Lawrence. Look at her. Maybe I'd never seen a picture of her before. And this is another chunky biography. About 300 pages. I've read Bowen's The Last September. Loved it. It was my first by her and certainly not my last. And what little I gleaned about her life from the introduction to the wonderful, very important introduction to that book made me curious to find out more. So here we go. Has some color photos inlaid. Not necessarily beautifully reproduced, but... Oh, I like the introductory paragraph of the introduction, so let me share it with you. The day Elizabeth Bowen began her late life memoir, she took a walk around Hythe, England, looking for a road she had known 60 years earlier. It was there. Not a soul was on it. Nothing of its character was gone. The May Saturday morning was transiently, slightly hysterically sunny, with a chill undertone. Such scenes cast themselves on the screen as a silent film. I have a wonderful visual memory, said Bowen, but I remember the conversations hardly at all. And here is an anti-racist book. It's kind of like a memoir. This is kind of Canada's answer to Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. The Skin We're In, A Year of Black Resistance and Power by Desmond Cole. And Desmond Cole was not somebody I knew about when I lived in Canada. I left Canada 11 years ago, and in that time he has become quite well known. He is a black journalist, radio host, and activist in Toronto, and this is his memoir of racism in Canada, particularly Toronto, including Toronto police brutality in the year 2017. Actually, I didn't intend to put this one in the pile for today because it just arrived in the mail today, but what the hell. This is another Furrowed Middlebrow book, Miss Carter and the Ifrit. I don't know what the Ifrit is, but it's an important part of the story, and the author is Susan Alice Kirby, and this is a very new release. I mean, Furrowed Middlebrow, an imprint of Dean Street Press, reprints women's fiction from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on. This one is another 1945 World War II novel. Sounds great so far. And the author, I'd never heard of her. She was born in Cairo in 1908 and lived in Canada from 1912, returning to England, which is where her family comes from, in 1935. And this story is partially set in Canada. So that sounds fabulous. And does the back tell me what an Ifrit is? The protagonist is a single woman in her late 40s, I'm just getting excited already, who works in the censorship office. Oh, okay, there's a little bit of fantastical thing that I don't necessarily like. The Ifrit is kind of like a genie, and that's what sends her to Canada. The genie pops out of the fireplace and sends her to Canada. Well, we'll give it a try. Nice cover, though. And the Canadian connection is interesting. Didn't I say my New Year's resolution was to read the synopsis of the books before I buy them? I probably wouldn't have bought this had I known that before. That's my 2021 New Year's resolution. So Ifrit is some kind of a genie thing, so the opening sentence. To look at Miss Georgina Carter, you would never have suspected that a woman of her age and character would have allowed herself to be so wholeheartedly mixed up with an Ifrit. Next, I have a novel by a Maori writer from New Zealand, Patricia Grace's Potiki. I don't remember how I found out about it, but I did. Just by browsing. I bought this at the book sale at Kinokuniya Books, so I saw it on the shelf and picked it up, not knowing anything about the book or the author. Patricia Grace is the author of 5 novels, 4 short story collections, and also some children's books. This novel was published in 1987. She was born in Wellington in 1937, so she's in her 80s. She lives in Plimerton on the ancestral land of Ngati Toa, and this story is set in a small Maori community. I like the opening paragraph, but there's too many Maori names there that I'm probably going to massacre, so I won't subject you to that. But I have made an audacious promise to BookTube that if my favorite read of the year, Shuggie Bain, by Douglas Stewart, wins the Booker, I will become a Booker groupie in 2021. But I was kind of a closet Booker groupie in 2020. Don't tell anyone. Because I bought a lot of books from the long list, and one of the last ones that I have to haul is Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. And I bought this solely, not because Eric Carl Anderson loved it, but because he did a Zoom chat with Sophie Ward and I fell in love with her. And I only watched 2 minutes and thought, okay, I'm going to read the book and come back to this video. It's actually more philosophical, and I don't do philosophy. Psychology, as long as you're not talking Freud or something. I like psychological realist fiction, but philosophical fiction, not so much. So I don't know if I'm going to get along with it, but I have to try it. It was on the long list, but if I remember correctly, not the short list. I'll put a link to the video in case you haven't seen it, because you just fall in love with Sophie Ward in the first 2 minutes. Greg of Supposedly Fun and I sprung a surprise on Britta for her 60th birthday earlier this year. We did a Zoom activity with her. It was a fun video. I'll put a link in the show notes. And one of the books that she talked about as part of that surprise activity on Zoom was this graphic novel, which about a week or 2 later I found very cheap secondhand in Tokyo. Persepolis, The Story of a Childhood by Marjane Satrapi, if I'm pronouncing that right. And it is about her childhood in Iran, and Britta has recently read it, so I'm going to give it a try. One of my top reads of the year, my review has not yet been edited and published, but it probably will by the time you see this, in which case I will put a link to that review in the show notes, is a 1956 novel from the UK by Elizabeth Jane Howard, The Long View. I absolutely loved it, and I was it got me so interested to find out more about the author that, because there was a biography in an online warehouse here in Tokyo, I won't mention the name of the online seller, I could get it the next day, and so I bought it. Elizabeth Jane Howard, A Dangerous Innocence by Artemis Cooper. And eventually, Leah, who I did the buddy read of the novel with, and I will be buddy reading this. She had a fascinating life, and the only reason anybody needs to remember Kingsley Amos's name is that he was once briefly married to Elizabeth Jane Howard. Otherwise, he is eminently forgettable, wouldn't you agree? A Ghost in the Throat by Doreen Nagrifa, an Irish writer, just published a month or 2 ago by Tramp Press out of Dublin. She's a bilingual writer whose books explore birth, death, desire, and domesticity. And this is her prose debut, so that means she's probably written some poetry. Doris of Aldi Books and I will be buddy reading this for the Irish Readathon. She sculpts essay and autofiction to explore the deep connection between 2 writers centuries apart. One is in this 18th century, an Irish noblewoman, and one is present day, a young mother. Well, that's either going to work really well for me or not at all. Chapter 1 is called A Female Text, and it is so short. without the epigraph, which I won't read, but I'm going to read the first chapter, a female text, in its entirety. This is a female text. This is a female text composed while folding someone else's clothes. My mind holds it close, and it grows, tender and slow, while my hands perform innumerable chores. This is a female text born of guilt and desire, stitched to a soundtrack of cartoon nursery rhymes. This is a female text, and it is a tiny miracle that it even exists, as it does in this moment, lifted to another consciousness by the ordinary wonder of type. Ordinary, too, the ricochet of thought that swoops, now, from my body to yours. This is a female text, written in the 21st century. How late it is. How much has changed. How little. This is a female text, which is also a quina, a dirge and a drudge song, an anthem of praise, a chant and a keen, a lament and an echo, a chorus and a hymn. Join in. Well, that reads like kind of a prologue, but it's not marked as a prologue, and that was quite intriguing. And finally, I don't remember how I found out about this Anglo-Welsh novel, but I did. It was published 12 years ago. Her name is Fleur David, and her novel is called 20,000 Saints. I found the pronunciation through a recent, pandemic Zoom-type chat with her entitled Telling Welsh Stories. So I'm going to put a link to that video, not merely so that you can learn how to pronounce her name, Fleur David, but I fell in love with her in the first 10 seconds because she said, where do I look? What do I do? So I'm going to watch the rest of the video myself eventually. Anyway, the novel from 2008 is 20,000 Saints. Fleur David is a novelist and singer-songwriter. She has a PhD in the poetry of R.S. Thomas and teaches creative writing at Swansea University. Well, that's the city where BookTube's own Tired Mama Tries to Read lives. I'm dying to talk to her about Fleur David. She was first published at the age of 20. She has written 3 Welsh language novels and won 2 of the top fiction prizes in Wales. But this one was written in English. I'm assuming because there is absolutely no information about translation at all. It is about an archaeologist who returns to the island of his childhood, Bardsey, which I assume is in Wales. So it's set on an island. I have a bookish friend that I'm going to make sure knows about this. And that sounds pretty interesting. It's a long first paragraph, but it's quite lovely, so let me share it with you. Men were scarce that summer. The women of Bardsey Island had begun giving each other languorous looks, had begun talking to each other in quivering, feverish tones. Most of them didn't even realize they were doing it. For months, all eyes had been turned outwards, towards the sea and its glittering possibilities. The arrival of each boat a benediction, a sudden breeze across the fusty August heat. But when those weekly boats failed to deliver a single man, it wasn't long before the women started to peek, cautiously and curiously, at one another. It seemed that by now any flash of flesh was enough to cause certain stirrings. The subterranean shadows beneath a stranger's shirt, the surrendering of a best friend's ankle or an inner thigh, the seductive gaze of a neighbor's belly button. And unless today's boat had a man on board, as they'd been promised, it was only a matter of time before their glances and gestures sprouted hands and lips, before their wandering, unreal thoughts became the subject of island murmurs. Well, I'm not sure where that's going to go, but situational lesbianism could be an interesting theme for a novel set on a Welsh island. Certainly very well written. All right, what do you think? Is that a interesting sounding batch of books or what? Thanks for watching.